G'day, folks. Today I'm going to explain to you why I was wrong and why it's a very good thing. So, on the 20th of April, I produced a YouTube video titled 2022 AFL Draft South Australia's Best Ever Draft Crop and Victoria's Weakest by the Numbers. So, in this video, I went through at the time that of my top 13 prospects, 7 were South Australians, 3 Victorians, and 3 Western Australians. Which, if the draft was to work out that way, and this was just my rankings at the time, but it would be absolutely historic where in every draft past, in any part of the draft, you're always going to have at least half Victorians, and then you've sort of got the rest. And South Australians don't tend to make up a large proportion of the early parts of the draft. So that was the scenario of the time. And then in May, so these were my May AFL Draft Power Rankings as released on ESPN. So in my top 15, I had, and you can even go top 14 for that matter. Again, 7 were South Australians, and I only had 4 Victorians inside that top 15. So if the draft again was to work out that way, it would be an absolutely woeful result for Victoria. Now, of course, moving forward to August. So in hindsight, of course, my view at the time was very, very wrong. So basically, in short, my views on the South Australians, I very much overestimated the quality of the crop. And we've really seen it with really, I guess, the lack of progression from a lot of the South Australians. Whereas on the other hand, with the Victorians, well, we've just really, I guess, consistently over recent months, really seen player after player emerging and really making this draft look very good based on what is now quite a substantial amount of strength in Victorian prospects. And the question, of course, of how can it happen? Well, of course, last year I was watching a substantial amount of Sandful, so between league, reserves, under 18s, so I was very much familiar with the prospects, whereas with the Victorians, well, the last 2 years we're barely seen them. So that does absolutely play a part. But additionally, if we even look at what they did at the very start of the year, well, you had the South Australians where some of them finished off last year incredibly well and some started this year absolutely on fire. Whereas with the Victorians, in really watching a lot of NAB League very early in the season and still obviously continuing since, but the standard early on, you could really see the rust and there just really was that something lacking where it just didn't really look as strong of a product as we've really seen in recent years and come to expect from the NAB League as a competition. But of course, as I've gone on and mentioned, well, we've really seen that progression. And now with my August AFL Draft Power Rankings, well, 13 of my top 20 are Victorians. So that's the stage we're at. So to compare what I had early in the year, so this was in May. So I had, at this time, Tom Scully at number 2. So I really liked what he was doing last year in 2021, and you've got the late year birthday, so that's appealing, and 204 centimeters, but this is the thing that really had me going early in the year. So he was good for, in his first, I believe it was 6 games, he kicked 33 goals and took 24 contested marks. Huge numbers. But what's he done since? And he's actually dropped outside of my top 20 now. So with Tom Scully, why he's dropped off? Well, in his most recent 6 Sandful under 18 games, well, just the 14 goals and 13 contested marks. Well, that's a huge drop. So that's not good. And then seeing him during the under 18 championships, of which he was only picked for the very final game, well, 0 goals, 0 contested marks. So basically dropping off substantially to that level is really disappointing. And particularly for someone who stylistically, I guess you could say, is a fairly one-dimensional player, is that really tall guy who is just that really sort of imposing marking presence. So that's really quite a disappointing thing, and really, I guess, performing that way, well, really, Scully has to drop outside my top 20, which is a shame. But he is still someone certainly later on, or as a rookie, if he made it through, I would very strongly consider, it's fair to say, as someone where he still has shown that sort of incremental improvement, particularly early in the year, and having the attributes late year birthday, maybe he can develop into something. And if he can't develop as a key forward, maybe you try him as a key back and maybe that works out. But the next player, so at number 3, and again, this was at the start of the year, so this was in my May power rankings, well, I had Harry Lemmy at number 3. So seeing what he did late in the year last year, so in his last 3 games. Well, he kicked 3 goals in each of them, so that was terrific. But then in his last of his Sandful under-18 finals, well, what he managed was 20 disposals, it was 12 marks and 3 goals. So huge numbers. So doing those sorts of things, rightly so, I was very optimistic coming into the year. He's around that sort of 2 metre mark, huge engine, so you've got those sorts of things to look forward to. But then seeing him this year, well, he's really struggled. So he started the year at the Sandful at league level, struggled, couldn't get a touch. In the under-18s, look, he's really regressed from where he was at last year. And then seeing him during the under-18 championships, this is what's seen him drop all the way outside of my top 20. So over 3 games, these were his totals overall. So put all the numbers together, this is what he got. So he had 16 disposals, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 1 goal. That's across 3 games. So that's really terrible. So given he was really a no-show in all 3 games where there was just no impact whatsoever. So again, I can't justify keeping him in the top 20 if he's playing like that. So earlier in the year, look, in having these guys rated so highly, well, I still feel justified in having them at that time rated as highly as I did. But of course, when you see that sort of progression from that point, well, it's pretty obvious they have to drop all the way down and out of that top 20 mix. So certainly with those 2 key forwards from South Australia, well, I have to look at them very differently. And with Lemmy, look, if he develops, maybe he can be a taller version of Tom Lynch, so of course the Adelaide version. And possibly you could look at him maybe as that sort of Justin Westhoff type, where, look, he's not going to be that genuine key forward. He's more that super tall sort of flanker, and you really hope that he develops. So it's more of a hope than you pick with confidence at this stage. And I could say similar with a Tom Scully as well, where you just hope they develop. So of course, when they're in that camp, or you can't have them rated too highly. At number 5, so I'm quite happy with my ranking here from, again, this was in May, but Mateus Filippo. So having him at number 5, well, I've had him as high as number 1, and I still claim to this day that of everyone in this draft pool, he has the highest ceiling of anyone. So, and that's of course Ashcroft included, where I'm looking at him very similarly in profile to a Marcus Bontempelli from where he was drafted, where they're both same height, same sort of physical and athletic profiles. And you've also both got, in both cases, December birthdays. But I'd say with a Filippo that, compared certainly to Bontempelli at the same age and stage, I'm a bit more certain in terms of best position. Where with a Bont, there were genuine questions of, well, is he a mid, is he a forward, is he going to be running off half-back? Whereas with a Filippo, I can say with a bit more confidence, no, this guy's going to be impactful both as a mid and as a forward. So that's sort of the difference there. But in terms of capabilities, in terms of ceiling and upside, well, I have Filippo, if all goes well, if he has an injury-free career, or relatively enough, where his development isn't impeded and he has that sort of continual run over the years, well, that's the sort of thing that he could accomplish if everything went absolutely right. But of course, no guarantees. You don't expect that. It's just if everything went perfectly right. So Wyan Ashcroft, of course, in the last month has passed him. Well, I'm looking at the equation as, well, the ceiling of Ashcroft, well, he could be a top 10 mid, maybe even a top 5 mid in the comp very reasonably, and there's quite a high likelihood of that being the case. So, yeah, look, given that, well, he's got a very high floor. Whereas with a Filippo, you can't say with as much confidence that his floor is going to be that high because, look, he's not going to be that year one high production guy that an Ashcroft, who is going to get Nick Dacos numbers next year, really can be looked at as. So it's sort of weighing up, well, do you want the guy with the floor that is dramatically higher than the other guy, or do you want the guy with the ceiling slightly higher? So that's why I've moved Ashcroft ahead in that mix. So of course, yeah, very happy with Filippo, and loved sort of particularly moments, but also stretches during the under-18 champs. I saw exactly what I wanted to see at that level, so that was great. Billy Dowling, I had at number 8. And yeah, on the weekend, he just had a ridiculous game. So he had 44 disposals, 4 goals, 3 behinds. So there's sort of a lot of talk more so now around him being a prospect. And I was on him early in the year for the form he was showing, and he was good last year as well in the Sandful under-18s. But I have had to push him back down my power rankings outside of my top 20 for a very specific reason. So what I've noticed with Dowling is just in terms of how he reads the ball in the air, he just doesn't read the drop very well. And additionally, his hands overhead, he just drops too many marks. So they're my issues there, where it's just I watch him and I get frustrated with those aspects. But of course, racks it up, runs all day, good skills, hits the scoreboard. So they're the great things. But yeah, look, you've got, I guess, that sort of, weakness there, relatively speaking. But look, he's also not the most damaging player as well. So they're the sort of things you weigh. But of course, he'll be inside my top 50 power rankings, no doubt about it. Just depends on where. So between now and the end of the season will really determine where in that sort of, you could call it 21 to 50 range, a Billy Dowling will fit. But I'm still a fan. I still think he's one of those potentially developable players. So certainly a name to look out for. But with the development of a lot of the others, it's fair to say that there's no way I'll be considering him inside the top 10 of my power rankings. And look, I can't even envisage him realistically getting back inside that top 20, just with how good a lot of the Victorians are looking at the moment. So then in May, my number 9 was Kobe Ryan. So up until that stage, well, he'd gone really well in the Sandful under-18s and reserves, and following on from my producing of these rankings, well, he then started to receive some Sandful League opportunities, and he's looked really good at that level as well. So he's one of those really immediate midfielders with really that sort of strong contested ball winning. So it's one of those for me that still ticks the boxes. So but look, where I've dropped him off and why I've dropped him off, and look, he's still inside my top 20 at this time, so I believe he's at number 15 in my August rankings, but his under-18 championships weren't overwhelmingly strong, particularly when he was used in other positions. So he's very much someone where, look, you can put him anywhere and he's still going to find the ball, but put him through the midfield, so put him at the centre bounces, and that's where he's going to have his impact. So, and in the last of the under-18 championships games for South Australia, that's when he played really good footy and really had an impact. So, so look, that plays a part, but really a lot of it is other players moving past him. But look, with that somewhat below expectation under-18 championships, particularly with the way he's been going at Sandful League level, I was expecting quite a bit more from a Kobe Ryan to be really one of those players that was really going to, I guess, have a huge impact for South Australia. But his impact, I'd say, was more so moderate overall, with just that last game a good one. So, look, that's why he's dropped when you've really got other Victorians who have really, I guess, got substantial reasons for their moves up in more recent months. Adam D'Aloia, so I had him at number 13, and that was a really safe pick, where basically what he was doing last year, absolutely sensational. And look, he's been playing incredibly well this year as well. And of course, the SA MVP during the under-18 championships. So he's one of those guys who just performs to a high level and absolute contested beast. But yeah, look, he does lack those other strings to his bow. So he's not necessarily going to be that most damaging player. But he does still hit the scoreboard. So, look, he is still someone that I rate as very draftable, and he's still just inside that top 20 for me. So, look, maybe he gets pushed ever so slightly out, but I'm still very much a D'Aloia fan, it's fair to say. So, I think he's one of those where, look, he could drop into the even late second, early third round sort of range for a very rough feel. And I could even say the same of Kobe Ryan, but look, I think in that sort of range, he could represent quite strong value, it's fair to say. And I think in both cases, they'd represent value exceeding where they would be picked if that was to be the case. And then at 14, so I had Isaac Keeler. So he's one of those where the reason he was even on my board in May was what he was doing last year. So he played some absolutely spectacular football where I was thinking coming into the year, this guy's a genuine number one chance. So, but look, in the early months of the year, it was slow going for him. And then in the weeks leading up to the under-18 championships, that's where we really saw the pickup, the improvement. His first 3 under-18 championships games, I thought he was one of South Australia's absolute best. And I thought he was their best tall throughout the weeks as well. So particularly just what he was doing as a forward, he was pushing up the field, winning the ground balls, just with that, just a real slickness, like almost Buddy-esque in that sort of respect, where you wouldn't expect it from a 198, just that athleticism, mobility, that sort of clean one-touch ground ball winning. Just, you've got a lot of attributes there that are really promising, and he's very dangerous close to goal as well. So there was a lot there that was promising. The last of his under-18 championships games, that was not an impressive game at all. But he's one where he certainly has scope. So with Aquila, unfortunately, he's just been squeezed out of my top 20. I really wanted to keep him inside that top 20, but he has snuck down and to specifically spot 21 on my power rankings. So I've actually got him one spot ahead of Matthew Jefferson, who is one of Victoria's best key forward prospects. So, and of course, he had a really strong championships himself with 7 goals in one of the games. So there's that absolute headline there. So I'm absolutely a Keeler fan. And look, the unfortunate thing is for Adelaide fans, with Keeler being part of their Next Gen Academy, well, I do envisage someone inside the top 40 still more likely than not taking him. It'd be very surprising to see him drop outside that top 40. So I do think he'd be somewhere in the second round would be roughly where we can expect Keeler to land. But we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I'm still a fan, and I think over the long term is one of those guys where he can really become a prospect as that mostly key forward who can give those relieving ruck minutes, given he's got those capabilities further afield. And then, of course, we've got my Victorians from April. So there were 4 that I rated inside my top 15, and they were the right 4 ultimately. So I had Ashcroft, Saddis, Wardlaw, and Sheasel. So, and actually at the time, so April 20th, when I produced my video, well, Sheasel actually wasn't part of that original top 13 group that I was initially referring to. But with really strong play, well, he had sort of pushed his way in. And then, of course, later on, he'd show that he also has midfield scope as well as those forward of centre capabilities, which has more recently pushed him as high as 2 in my rankings, but currently spot 3. So to move forward to August, which I'm sure is what you all want to hear about, well, the big change has been that I've gone from 7 South Australians inside that top 13. This was at the time of producing the video, which was April the 20th. Well, I've moved from that position to now only having the 4 South Australians inside the top 20, and one of which is a mature ager. So how's that? And I'd describe it as a real flippening event where I'm really looking at it as now it's Victoria that have the substantial, overwhelming strength in this draft. So going from, again, at that time of the video, it was really 3 inside that top 13. Or if you look at my May power rankings, well, it was just the 4 inside that top 15. Well, now it's a completely flipped dynamic where I've got 13 of the top 20 prospects in the draft based on my power rankings. Well, they're Victorians. So it's now looking like a really terrific draft from the Victorians, and really it's all thanks to the improvements so many of them have shown over recent months, particularly the last 2 months. Just seeing them through the under-18 champs, seeing them more recently in the NAB League, it's just really been phenomenal to see just the huge strides and substantial improvement that a lot of these Victorians, both metro and country, have made. And before I go through some of the Victorians that have really earned their way onto my draft board and have really impressed me in recent months, well, I just want to give a more broad general draft update. So basically, I'm looking at the draft now as really quite a strong one. So whether you've got a top 5, top 10, top 15, top 20, second round pick, third round pick, I'm really liking this draft. I think there's really substantial opportunity to do great things. So and in particular, I'm seeing, and this is from a tweet recently, well, I was really seeing, my observation of this draft is that there's substantial strength, and the greatest strength that I've ever seen in terms of prospects that are proficient both as midfielders and forwards. Maybe it's just an effect of a lot of youngsters looking at a Dustin Martin and thinking, this guy's the best in the comp, I want to be like him. Or maybe in the last couple of years, maybe it's looking at a Petrarca, thinking, I love the way this guy's going about it, I want to be like him. Maybe there's a bit of that too. But it just seems to be that yeah, maybe it's just they're recognizing as well that it's these sort of mid forwards that are impacting across both positions. They're the ones that are getting the paychecks, getting the recognition, and ultimately winning football games. So, yeah, so we're really seeing that really in numbers this year. And we'll see it again next year. And I think that's going to be a real trend that we see just a lot more of these guys coming through with those capabilities. So to go through those Victorians that have really elevated their draft stocks in recent months. So of course, starting with Sheasel. So started out the year fantastic as a forward, but and look, he's still having some fantastic games as a forward as well. But importantly as well, he's had those few 30 plus disposal midfield games, and he's shown through there that he wins his own ball. He's got that evasion. He's got some skills through there. So he's got the ability to play ultimately as a midfield as well as be just an incredibly talented forward. So having that, look, this guy's on quality, a top 5 pick, but I think on draft day, he's going to go somewhere top 10. So certainly a prospect to be excited about and really look forward to seeing, because he's really, in the context of this draft, something like a Stevie J equivalent. So that's a name that hopefully gets some people up and about. So next name, so Cadman. So he's been absolutely terrific for Vic Country and in more recent weeks as well in the NAB League. So during the Under-18 Championships, Cadman really established himself as the premier key forward in this draft. So just in terms of the number of different ways that he can take advantage of opposition key defenders. That's what you want. You don't want guys who just have one trick, because ultimately, if you can shut down that trick, you can stop him. So with a Cadman, that's not at all the case. Where he's strong, he'll take contested marks, but is an absolute beast over the ball if it hits the ground. He leads high up the ground. He's dangerous whether it's in front of goal, further afield. He can push as well. So you just have so many options with a Cadman that it's absolutely insane. And looking at his contested possession numbers in recent weeks in the NAB League has just been absolutely silly. Whereas pretty much leading his team for disposals, contested possessions, was playing as a key forward. And he's hitting the scoreboard at a huge rate, taking his contested grabs as well. So, yeah, absolute machine and huge improver. So, of course, for those that have seen my past videos where I talk about things that I look for in key forwards, well, one of those key things is rate of improvement. And Cadman is showing by far and away this year the rate of improvement that absolutely exceeds any other. So, for that reason, Cadman is easily the best key forward in this draft, easily, with separation. So, don't think I'll be putting him inside my top 3 this year necessarily, but I could consider him as high as number 4 in my power rankings. That's how highly I think of his game. So, absolutely watch out for him inside that top 10. I think he's a pretty clear-cut top 10 pick now, and it's all down to really how well he's gone really in the last sort of couple of months. It's just been absolutely terrific. Really breaking out for Vic Country, but then continuing and even continuing to build on that form in the last few weeks in the NAB League. Just sensational. So credit to him. Bailey Humphrey. So this guy, look, at the start of the year, he was kicking goals, looking quite good. But then, of course, he's missed that quite a bit of time. Had surgery, is back now. So unfortunately, he missed those first 3 Under-18 Champs games, though for the final Vic Metro, Vic Country game, which will be ultimately the decider, late September, we should be seeing him there and then. But just sort of seeing his game the other week, and this is what really elevated him on my power rankings and why he's inside the top 10. So I'll get his numbers here. So he had 31 disposals, 12 marks, 4 of which contested, 4 goals, 5 behinds, 2 score assists. So absolutely dominated. Yeah, it was a 100-point trouncing, but yeah, look, just this guy's too good, and yeah, just putting up those sorts of numbers, it's just silly. And look, early in the year as well, he was putting up numbers as well, finding the ball, winning it contested, hitting the scoreboard. They're the things you want. So he's got that genuine midfield forward craft, but just, yeah, being as dominant as he is forward, you almost want to take advantage of that there. So, yeah, so he's moved into my top 10 rightly, and I didn't even need to see what he did on the weekend, which again, fantastic. And now people are, as well as what I was sort of saying last week, this guy's a top 10 pick, and others seem to be sort of coming around to that idea that, yeah, maybe this guy is that legit that he actually could go that high. So, yeah, certainly an exciting player to watch over that last sort of portion of the year in the NAB League there. So, next up, so I've got Henry Hustwaite. So, seeing his transformation through the midfield. So, we've got that sort of late blooming 194 centimetre, tall, big-bodied, strong ball-winning midfielder. So, during the champs, he had one of the highest contested possession rates, and he just won a substantial amount of it. So in terms of whether it's percent won contested, and in terms of like total amount of contested, so he was 10 plus contested possessions per game, and there were higher production guys that weren't nearly doing that. So yeah, looking really good, it's fair to say, and even continuing on from the under-18 champs, he's continued it in the NAB League and looking absolutely sensational through the midfield. So we could be looking at a Patrick Cripps equivalent if all goes well. So really exciting stuff, and he's following that same sort of trajectory, at least at this stage in proceedings. So, of course, not suggesting he'll become Cripps in the future, but certainly the signs are at this stage that the trajectory is really good, and he's looking like he'll be a fantastic mid. So if he's getting those high 20 and 30 disposal type games, if he's getting his, in the NAB League, at least sort of his 15 or so contested possessions, well, that's amazing stuff at that sort of 194 centimetres as that late bloomer who's even still sort of growing into his body, still has upside for growth and quite a substantial amount. So exciting stuff. And he's played key defence as well, but look, the way he plays through the midfield, why would you chuck him in defence? You just don't. So, but it's good he has those sort of tricks in his bag, and maybe it means we see that sort of development of maybe it's the contested marking. Maybe in the future he can go forward as well. So there's some of the things that could plausibly be able to be developed into his game, but yeah, it's looking at this stage at least like a contested bull inside. So huge asset, so that's why he's risen on my draft board. Jai Clark, look, he was going okay in the NAB League and really quite well and whatnot, but yeah, look, getting up to the under-18 champs, that's where he really impressed the socks off me. So it looks like Vic Country is best for mine throughout, and he's got the ball winning, he's got that all-round game, strong mark for someone of only that 180 centimetres, but he can also impressively, even though he hasn't played a lot forward, he looks dangerous when he is. So those are those sorts of indicators that are really good. And again, can win his own ball. He was sub 10 contested possessions per game during the champs. But even with that being said, well, he's had his games where he's getting his 15, 16 contested possessions in the NAB League. So he can win his own ball to quite a good level, it's fair to say. So, yeah, one of those prospects where you don't have to worry. And look, he's got the aggression as well. So he'll be a really good mid. And yeah, again, that's why he's on the board and why he absolutely has to be there. When he's going into the under-18 champs and getting the numbers that he was earlier in the year in the NAB League, well, that's a great indicator right there, and he's continued that sort of elevated rate of production in the NAB League as well since. So really good stuff there from Clark. And then moving on to a Cameron McKenzie. So a St Kilda Next Generation Academy, but sorry Saints fans, this guy's going first round. No chance you're going to get him, unless of course you pick him on your own sort of volition with your own pick. But yeah, look, with a McKenzie, look, he's probably going top 10. And yeah, it's just been really, I guess, the rate of improvement that he's shown throughout the year. So it's been terrific all year, but he's really gone from strength to strength, just rapid, consistent improvement. So in the weeks leading up to the under-18 championships, that's where I was really starting to see him break out and come into his own in a big, big way. But then during the under-18 championships for Vic Metro, there was no Wardlaw, there was no Saddis. So as we see at Sandringham with the Ashcroft and McKenzie combination, well, that carried over to Vic Metro, and McKenzie just had a huge under-18 championship. So just, yeah, seeing that 1-2 punch at work, just really terrific stuff. So he's got the skills, he's got the pace, wins his own ball, got that inside-outside balance. So yeah, ultimately that's why we see him on the draft board. So when you're performing to such a high level and then you've got all the tools, yeah, he has to absolutely be inside that ranking, no doubt. But again, it's a consistent story of with all these guys, well, they've been improving. That's why they're on the board now and why they weren't early in the year. So shouldn't really be any surprises there. But moving on to Lewis Hayes. So, of course, the brother of Port Adelaide's Sam. But yeah, with Lewis, look, is a key defender. And yeah, he's just shown that continual improvement. And again, you've got that late year birthday, high upward trajectory, just keeps on keeping on improving. So During the under-18 championships, it looked like he was getting better across the games, but he was racking it up in defence. So all the intercept marks, terrific stuff. Using it really, really well for a guy of that sort of 197, 198 centimetres. So, he's a really exciting player. So, of course, he can get stronger, build his one-on-one craft. No one's perfect. Hayes is still a developing player, but, just the improvement is there. So, with the rate of improvement, with the production, showing those sort of attributes that you want to see, he's coming along really nicely. And for me, I would not hesitate to spend a first-round pick on him. He won't be in the first round on most draft boards at this stage, but, just from what he's been showing both NAB League and Under-18 Championships, I can't ignore Hayes, and he has to really be inside those power rankings and at quite a reasonable level, because I do see that upward trajectory and that rapid upward trajectory at that really continuing. Because with key position players, the key is, what they're doing in year one doesn't matter. It's what they're doing in year 4. After that first 4 years, we sort of know who they're going to be. And then in year 5, you want them really dominating. So that's what it's more so about. And if they're going really well earlier than that, that's terrific. That's really a bonus. But you really need to give him those years. And with a Hayes, you give him those years, I think is going to be terrific. So again, just with the attributes, where I don't honestly have him all that far behind a Buslinger, who's this year's consensus top key defender. So personal opinion, I'm sure others out there will disagree. That's fine. But watch out for Hayes. He's going to be a good piece, I feel. So as long as he gets developed well, I'm really sort of optimistic about what he's going to look like. Mitch Sibkowski, so he's one coming into the year where he was pretty highly hyped, and he's really maintained, where he's maintained his form. He's really always sort of been that projected first round pick, and I still sort of project him in that sort of range as well. So I think there's still sort of a pretty good chance he goes first round, assuming he continues playing really good footy. But during the under-18 championships, he was a really good piece there, and probably after Clark for me was really that next best piece for Vic Country, certainly through the midfield anyway. So just really has a good balance to his game, but it's the inside distribution by hand that's particularly impressive. But good athlete, wins his own footy, finds a heap of it. So skill's pretty good as well. So that's sort of a rough sort of feel with his game. But again, when you've got those sort of high level performers, it's really hard to leave them out of that top 20 when they're really going that well. And then we've got Oliver Hollands, so younger brother of Elijah. So different player, doesn't necessarily have that same forward of centre craft, not as impactful, but one of those guys where he just runs all day, racks it up, but very constructive with the footy and does have that inside-outside balance. And the game that got him inside my top 20, and I haven't really had him quite inside that top 20, I've always had him around that fringe, but it's the Vic Country WA game. That's the one that solidified it for me. So in my power rankings, which you can find on ESPN, my August power rankings, I go through the numbers for Hollands as well as all the other players and sort of those numbers that complement their games. So, that was the game where it's like, I really need to sort of have him in there and show respect. And he's one where he could push even closer to that 10 range. So he's one I'll be continuing to track, no doubt. And then the last one inside that top 20 of the Victorians is Braden George. So he's had that extended absence with injury, which has been a shame. But what he was doing early in the season as a forward was very impressive. So hitting the scoreboard at a high rate, so 2.8 goals per game, but he just wasn't finding enough of the footy to justify having him even earlier. So only getting around those sort of 10 touches a game. So you do want that elevated production, but why he's in the top 20 is, it's just those sort of mix of attributes where he's really got that sort of power, hits the scoreboard like mad. He could be that future ball-winning midfielder with that absolute burst out of there with a forward of centre craft. So when you've got players with that sort of upside, you do need to acknowledge them and have them somewhere. But at this stage, having not seen him in a few months, it's just a case of really you have to sort of, you have to really have others sort of in front of him just because they've performed to such a level where you just have to admit they're being really terrific. Whereas a George, it's a lot more speculative, but he's one where, if he puts it together, he could be one of the absolute best in this draft. So, But yeah, it's really just with others improving. Look, I've had him at around 15 for a few months there, but I've had to shift him back to 19 just because we've had all these other Victorians that have absolutely had incredible sort of couple of months, roughly. So 2, in some cases 3 months. They've just played really good footy, and they've really dramatically elevated their draft cases. So when that's the case, well, if you've had a guy that's out with injury, you can only judge them on their sort of last performances. So you do have to shift back a George just that a little bit. So that's basically it with the Victorians. Thanks for watching, folks, and if you've got any draft questions, make sure you leave them in the comments section below. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully it gave sort of a better insight into really how the AFL draft prospects have really evolved over the course of the year, and really how things have changed in recent months. Because we've had that real, you could really say, flippening event where really early on the South Australians looked fantastic and looked like would make up a good portion of the early picks. But of course, we've had the absolute rise of the Victorians and really the declines and disappointments with a number of the South Australians. So that's basically what's happened, and why I was wrong earlier in the year in sort of having the opinion that I did, which at the time seemed right. But of course, things change over time, and this is just one of those instances where, look, you can have a lot of guys improving and dynamics change, and others who can sometimes even regress and move down draft boards in a hurry. So it's certainly a case of if you're a young up-and-coming draft prospect, well, you can't take anything for granted. And even if someone's assuming you're going to go high early in the year or a year or two out, well, those dynamics can change in an absolute hurry. So keep working at your games and, keep improving. Because as should hopefully have come through in this video, well, a lot of the guys I'm rating now have really shown substantial improvement throughout the season and are now really projecting to be really good AFL footballers. Whereas coming into the year, well, a lot of these players would have been in the really quite speculative basket where they wouldn't have necessarily been rated all that highly. So those sort of things can happen as well. So, but if you enjoy this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future updates. And if you're interested, I've got a top 60 power rankings currently sitting there waiting to go. So if this video hits 60 plus likes, I might just put together for YouTube my top 60 power rankings. So hopefully that's my next video, and I'll see you then.